So let's imagine, let's say you win in November. What do you do differently, and how do you change this course that it seems we are on for World War III? How do you get us out of Ukraine? How do you stop what's going on in the Middle East? How do you put a stop to this?
If you have a smart president, he can deal with Russia. He can deal with all of it. Russia would have never gone into Ukraine if I were president.
On the podcast episode that has destroyed the internet, which is now at 39 million views after just 3 days, Joe Rogan and Donald J. Trump discuss what should be first and foremost on everyone's mind as we vote: how to prevent World War III. While many Democrats are focused on abortion rights,
I feel like I've been banging my head against the wall talking about men in America. How American men will not be walking away from the health crisis that lack of abortion care is causing and will cause American women.
And getting trans surgery to illegal immigrants in jail.
I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving, I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care.
Call me crazy, but I'd say the number one issue should be avoiding World War III.
And when you look at the weapons we have today, the biggest threat we have in the world today is nuclear weapons.
Let's look back to 2009 when Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize.
But perhaps the most profound issue surrounding my receipt of this prize is the fact that I am the commander-in-chief of the military of a nation in the midst of two wars.
He then returned Iraq to ISIS when the US troops were pulled out. Obama's actions led to the city of Aleppo becoming a nightmare for thousands of Syrians. It also led to the refugee crisis in Europe and the rise of a terror group that Obama admitted he didn't see coming. And then Barack Obama became known for his drone strikes. Not so peaceful, if you ask me. The Nobel secretary later came out and stated that he regretted giving Obama the Peace Prize. On the other hand, though Trump signed the deal to get us out of Afghanistan, he never received the Nobel Peace Prize. And Americans then watched the very incompetent Biden-Harris administration botch the withdrawal. And unfortunately, it only got worse from there as Russia then invaded Ukraine on the Biden-Harris watch. Yes, the war is still ongoing, and the figures of death and injury and displacement are staggering. So far, Congress has approved $175 billion for Ukraine. We have reached the point where 55% of Americans say that we should not be sending additional funding to Ukraine. If the Russia and Ukraine war wasn't horrifying enough, Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th of 2023, creating another war funded in large part by the USA. From October 7th, 2023 to September 13th, 2024, the US spent a record $17.9 billion on military aid to Israel. So far, Israel has received $251.2 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars since 1959 and is the biggest recipient of U.S. military aid in history. While Iran is getting closer and closer to nuclear capabilities and tensions are rapidly escalating between Israel and Iran,
the Middle East is rapidly changing. You know, there are prophets that say the world will come to an end in the Middle East. You know that, right?
as both countries are now firing missiles at each other, and Russia is using drone strikes with drones made in Iran, and Ukraine is also ramping up its production and use of drones on the front line. The looming threat of World War III has become more real than it has been in decades. Donald J. Trump has also been nominated but did not win a Nobel Peace Prize in the past. He helped Israel and the UAE come together and reach a deal to normalize relations so that Israel agreed to suspend its controversial plans to annex part of the occupied West Bank. This became just the third Israel-Arab peace deal since 1948. Notice how the Palestinian leaders were caught off guard by the agreement. There seems to be a pattern here with how Trump gets business done. I think the Nobel Peace Prize is still in play for Trump if he shuts down a few more wars. Trump has repeatedly stated that the Russia-Ukraine war would not have started if he had been president for a second term.
I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled.
Joe Rogan pressed, "What would you do differently?" And here, Trump gives the same strategy that has worked for him before.
You would get both of them. I know both very well. And again, I do not want to tell you, for the purpose of looking smart to 5 people that say, oh, he was great. Because if I told you exactly what I do, I could never make the deal. All I can tell you is that I would meet with Putin and I would meet with him, and I know exactly what I'd say to each one of them. And I believe that as president-elect, I would get that war stopped, and stopped fast.
Essentially, I can't tell you. Yes, that is correct. Trump's ability to keep his cards close to his chest and trust his instincts has worked before and could have him being viewed as the peace president. Let's deep dive into how Trump handled making a deal with the Taliban, which, when you look at the totality of the deal, was a success on Trump's part in terms of getting it done, but a failure on Biden's part in terms of executing the actual withdrawal. Haters will criticize the withdrawal for the following reasons. First, critics complained that Trump negotiated with the Taliban, ignoring the fact that Hillary Clinton said she would do the same thing. In 2011, Hillary stated, "You don't make peace with your friends," and provided conditions. The insurgents must renounce violence, abandon al-Qaeda, and abide by the Constitution of Afghanistan, including its protections for women and minorities. These conditions mirrored in substance Trump's conditions, which were basically that if the Taliban didn't kill any Americans and wouldn't support terrorism, the U.S. wouldn't kill any Taliban. So it is hypocritical to fault Trump for negotiating with the Taliban. The fake news also complains that Trump made a deal that released 5,000 Taliban members.
And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released.
While the fine print, of course, read something completely different, that both political and combat members of the Taliban would be released, rather than what we would think of as straight up 5,000 terrorists. If you really want to see a bad prisoner swap, look who the Biden-Harris administration traded for Brittany Griner, the drug smuggler. They traded a guy called the Merchant of Death. And now, this Merchant of Death is back to doing what he does best. Haters also criticized the timeline set by Trump. Under the Doha Agreement, the USA was supposed to withdraw by May 2021. Biden pushed for September 2021 so he can make it a full 20 years. When he received pushback because of how insane it was to keep a pointless war going just to make it an even 20 years, Biden pushed the date up. On July 8th, Biden saying that speed is safety moved up the timeline for the full troop withdrawal to August 31st. Biden moved up this timeline even though he acknowledged that the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. Biden also assured Americans that a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan is not inevitable and denies that U.S. intelligence assessed that the Afghan government would likely collapse, and we all know how that went. Clearly, the date was malleable, and this is evident in an interview with New Yorker writer Dexter Filkins, the same guy who coined the phrase the forever war in relation to Afghanistan. Filkins pointed out Biden had the ability to decide whether or not he wanted to agree to the deal that was negotiated with the Taliban and not the Afghan government. Chris Miller, the acting defense secretary in the final months of the Trump administration, confirms what Filkins stated. Miller states, if he, meaning Biden, thought the deal was bad, he could have renegotiated. He had plenty of opportunity to do that if he so desired. Folks, the main point here is to look into how Trump made the plan to get the USA out of Afghanistan. And in relation to this, Filkins states, Trump unilaterally announced the troop withdrawals.
And the other thing that was pretty unconventional about the way that this negotiation happened was the U.S. diplomats are trying to negotiate a kind of a schedule for a withdrawal. And, there's a certain amount of bluffing involved, which is if we don't get the deal we want, we're not going to pull out. But while they were doing that over the course of 2019 and early 2020, President Trump was just kind of unilaterally announcing these troop withdrawals. And he didn't consult anybody and didn't even necessarily tell his negotiators that he was doing that. And so the whole thing was kind of unconventional, but there's an agreement. What's remarkable about it is that since February 2020, no American soldiers have been killed in Afghanistan. So the Taliban have in fact held to their word.
You can hear the begrudging respect that Dexter Filkins has for the unique tactics of Donald J. Trump, which only Donald J. Trump, he himself, knows.
It's a very, to me, it's an easy question because I think I can do it easily, but it's a complex question in the sense that the times change, every day changes. Who's winning, who's not winning? I mean, Russia's a war machine. Whether you like it or not, it just grinds along. You speak to people like Viktor Orban, he'll tell you it's just a big, fat war machine.
Compare this with the Biden-Harris administration and how they evacuated from Afghanistan, an evacuation that was so flawed, it resulted in the death of 13 service members.
Dozens of Afghans also killed.
ISIS-K is claiming responsibility for that attack.
We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
In addition to that, when Biden and Harris thought they had gotten a quote-unquote righteous strike on those involved in the death of these 13 service members, the Biden-Harris administration ended up killing a van full of kids.
Biden should have fired every military person involved with Afghanistan.
Here's something to consider. With Dick Cheney, the face of the military-industrial complex, now endorsing Kamala Harris, along with his daughter and George W. Bush's daughter, which side do you now think will be striving for peace?